don't have one, there's more outside you can bring in if you can find room. Everyone make sure to make room for anyone that needs it. It's a little warm in here, so no heavy breathers. Just keep it down. I'm keeping the fans running so we get some air circulation, but if you can't hear me consistently or other people, we can turn some fans off. Just let me know. Can everyone hear me right now?
Yeah. Yep.
All right, good. So if you have a question or as we're doing the discussion, remember, you got to speak up. I think that's it. We'll get started. All good? So first I wanted to thank everyone for coming and spending Mead Day with us, learning about Mead. This is awesome. When I opened this up, when I talked to QUAFF about doing this together, was thinking, yeah, we'd get most of the QUAFF people, maybe 25, 30 people, put it to 75 just to see what happened, and we ended up hitting the max like a week ago. So it's awesome. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited for this, and I'm going to go through some quick introduction stuff and some of the initial topics I want to talk about. What I want to emphasize, this is really a discussion. So you're not getting a handout. It's going to tell you everything to do. We're not making mead during this. It's not that kind of class. This is a high-level discussion. Hopefully we made it clear in the sign-up that you should have some knowledge of fermentation practices, whether you're a mead maker, a beer brewer, something, because we're not going to start at the beginning. We're going to get as high level as you guys want to go. So questions at any time, just raise your hand. This is going to be really informal, and I want to keep it a discussion. All right, so I'll start with me. I know a lot of you guys, some of you I don't. I'm the co-founder, along with my wife, Susanna, of Lost Cause Meadery. So award-winning craft meadery here. We've been open for about 9 months now. And then before going pro, and I put this up there so that, not to say this, I make great mead, blah, blah, blah. But so you guys know that I do know a little bit about making decent mead. I know what I'm talking about. So the processes I'm going to talk about have resulted in some medals. So 4 Mason Cup medals, that's the biggest mead competition in the world. But the ones I'm most proud of, 2 of them were for traditional meads that were a little under 4 months old. And that, to me, is a way of showing that you can make great mead at its core, right? And that's really what we're going to get into today. And then we've done some research on ale yeast and mead. A lot of you guys, I know, have seen that. I was at Zymurgy a few years ago. I'll reference it in here, but you can always look for that if you really want to dig into ale yeast and mead making. And there's a whole flavor profile for each one. We had a tasting panel and everything. And BJCP certified mead judge, along with some other QUAFF people here. I would really highly recommend everyone go through that. I was a totally different mead maker, mead drinker, mead enthusiast before and after going through that class. So it will change the whole way you think about mead. So quick intro to QUAFF, and then I'm going to turn it over to anyone that wants to represent QUAFF. Greatest homebrew club in the country, ever, right? National Homebrew Club of the Year, just won it again this year. That's a total of 9 National Homebrew Club titles. And then what was the statistic at the meeting they said? If we haven't won it, we come in second.
18 straight years.
18 straight years, first or second. So it's an honor for me to co-host this with QUAFF. QUAFF is really what got me, not got me into mead, but gave me the confidence to start making better mead, the knowledge to start making better mead. There's some people in here like Harold who have been making amazing mead for decades, and to go into QUAFF and know that there was already these experts on mead making and learning from that, and then continuing the discussion has just been fantastic. So if anyone is really into this and not a QUAFF member, I really encourage you to make it to the next meeting. Who wants to do a quick QUAFF blurb if there's anything I missed? Larry, I'm looking at you.
Alright, so yeah, so QUAFF, we meet fourth Tuesday every month at the Carlson Brewery on Santa Fe. We usually have a topic of the month, mostly discussions that come up. I don't know what the meeting is going to be this month. Anybody know? We'll find out in a second. But yeah, we welcome anybody to come. It's only $25 a year.
28.
So the meeting's on the 28th this month. And so we do things like this. We do several campouts to participate in NHC. And we have a number of BJCP type classes that different people in the club will lead. So if you're interested in enhancing your brewing knowledge or participating, please consider coming. And it's QUAFF.org.
All right, there's a lot we're going to get into, so I'm just going to start ripping through these. And again, if you have questions, raise your hand at any time. Also, I know there are some other amazing mead makers in here. There's a few people out there I've had their mead that is mind-blowing. Is Mike Cabra here? I never met Mike, but he signed up. He's won a couple Mazer Cup medals.
Where's Susan?
And NHC medals. So it's there's a lot of collective mead knowledge in here. So part of the discussion, I want to tap into that as well, because I have my process. There's a lot of other great processes. So here's everything we're going to go through. I want to start at the beginning, go all the way to the end of mead making, and I'll break it down. So let's start at the beginning. All right. Honey, just a few points on this. Always use raw honey. Who knows what raw honey means? What does it mean to be raw honey? Anyone? So, what's that? Yeah, it hasn't been pasteurized. Right. So, basically that means it hasn't been heated. I think for honey, it's like 110 degrees. And so it hasn't been heated above that. That is really important. Heat above that for honey is bad. And it used to be more common to boil your honey when you were making mead. It's much less now because people are realizing that you're burning off a lot of really delicate aromatics. And that is what makes honey and mead so amazing. Is that you have this beautifully delicious but very subtle and delicate sugar source, honey. And when you really get into these varietals, it can be amazing, but it's really easy to lose them. So you want raw honey. Don't ever heat it unless you're making a bochet, right, which is caramelized honey. We have one going right now. They're fun. They're a totally different flavor profile, but if you're not going for that, don't heat your honey. Where can you get it? Farmers markets locally. Almost every farmers market has a honey person. Mikulich, Little Italy, great honey. Melgis at North Park, great honey. Honey and OB that I'm on the fence about. Some of the stuff seems pure, some I'm not so sure. Any other recommendations for local great honey? If you have it, just shout it out. Anything in the supermarket is going to be pasteurized, so that doesn't count. So, all right. Farmers markets, you can actually get a lot online. Now, even with go to Amazon, you can get any kind of honey you want all over the world, and if you do just a little bit of research, there's a lot of good stuff out there. You do have to do some research, because many of you probably know there's an issue with honey coming from like China that's not really honey, and other countries. So you should kind of dig into it and make sure you know where it's sourced from. Okay, I want to touch on honey varietals, because this is my favorite part of making mead, is what you can get out of all the different honey varietals. Buckwheat, most people that have had buckwheat have had Eastern buckwheat, really barnyardy, dark, molasses. Then there's Western buckwheat. It's a whole different species of plant. So it's not just that, you know, East Coast, West Coast, we're a little more laid back here, laid back honey. It's a whole different plant. So Western buckwheat's going to be more like caramel, toffee. Not a lot of people use it, but if you've had my Meads, you know what it tastes like. Our bucket or one traditional is kind of our expression of that honey. For the QUAFF members doing the honey buy, that's the honey that you're getting. I think it's amazing because you get the components of a little bit of dark honey along with a lot of nice kind of balanced flavors. Note on orange blossom. Orange blossom is great. It's probably the most common honey used in mead making, at least in Southern California. I'm not the biggest fan of orange blossom, but if you make it really well, it can be outstanding. It also makes a good base for a lot of fruity, light, bright kind of meads. It's kind of well known that California orange blossom is better than Florida. So if you're getting orange blossom, get the local stuff. You shouldn't be getting stuff from Florida anyways. But that's kind of you talk to a honey person, that's generally regarded as true, usually. Higher quality. Two of the like all-star honeys, if you've ever had them, you know why. Tupelo and Meadow Foam. Good luck getting Tupelo right now, but if you can, for a decent price, get it and make amazing mead out of it. Meadow Foam, if you haven't had it, it's just like pure marshmallow, and it's from the Pacific Northwest. It's amazing. It's starting to kind of show up all the time in competitions because it's such an easy honey to make a really good traditional out of. But if you do it right, or even blend it with something that kind of complements it, you can make some really interesting meads. Did anyone ever use Meadow Foam? Nobody.
I've
Tasted it, yeah.
We use it one way.
You guys use it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sworn Meadery, Meadery to look out for coming soon. Yeah, I've never used Meadow Foam. I've tasted a lot. Some of my other favorites, just because I like talking about varietals, South Dakota clover. I know clover honey seems like that's probably the least interesting. Some of the clover honey I think is the most interesting because it's just like a cinnamon bomb that comes out of nowhere. It's regional though, so the best clover honey I've ever found is up in South Dakota. You can get it online, but clover can be really interesting. Mesquite, especially from Arizona, Texas, great stuff. Avocado, the Nikolavich honey. They go to the Little Italy Farmers Market. They have amazing avocado honey. They don't have a lot, otherwise I wouldn't have it. But you can make like a 5-gallon batch and it's fantastic, especially like a traditional aged on oak or it's a base for like a dark fruit. Raspberry blossom, any of the berry blossoms up in the Pacific Northwest, really light, delicate, but amazing. My favorite are Hawaiian varietals, macadamia nut, Lakua, I think it's called, coffee blossom from up there. Get your hands on that. Leatherwood is, that's the New Zealand stuff. It comes in like a can, almost looks like a shoe shine polish can. But it's really interesting. Same with Italian chestnut. It's really dark, almost leathery, like, I don't know, just very, very rich, complex honeys that I love. You really have to know what you're doing with them though, because they can come off very strong. But if you do, they're fantastic. If you have a lot of money and you really want to go crazy with honey varietals, Z Specialty Food up in Davis, I think they are. They have a fantastic selection of honey varietals, the most I've ever seen. The owner of it's the one that puts on the UC Davis mead making course. She's the head of the UC Davis Honey and Pollination Center. And her husband runs Z Specialty Food. fantastic honeys. Stuff like, what was the latest one that came out? Like weird ones you would never ever think of as a honey, and they're just fantastic. So check that out, but they're not cheap. But making mead isn't cheap either, so if you're gonna do it, might as well. That's what good stuff. I'm going to cover this real quick because I know there's a lot of beer brewers in here. Just so you guys know the difference between making mead and brewing beer. So beer wort, there's a lot of nutrients. In fact, usually there's all the nutrients you need for the yeast from the grain. Gravity, you're usually doing something not as extreme, you know, under 1.07 or so the yeast are happier with that, or they can take it on a little better. pH, you usually don't have to worry about a big pH drop and then having to recover from that. And Brian, we have more stools and chairs out there if you want to bring them in. Sugar is maltose. That's going to come up later and make it important. And then pretty strong flavor properties compared to honey when you're talking about the base wort. Mead, almost no nutrients that the yeast need. So we'll get into what you do with that. Gravity, usually dealing with a higher gravity. My stuff is usually about 1.1. We're starting to go a little higher. Most mead makers will go higher than that, especially as you get away from San Diego and into the bigger kind of sack meads. pH, honey has very low buffering capabilities, and that'll play a role in what we'll talk about later. Different sugars. So now we're dealing with simple sugars. That's going to be important for how you keep residual sugar in a mead. We'll talk about that. And a very delicate flavor and aroma. So you need to know these things if you have experience making beer, because all these things will change how you make mead.
So, what's 1.1?
Oh, gravity. I'm talking about gravity, yeah. So I still haven't switched over to Play-Doh yet, I need to. But bricks, I think that's, bricks and Play-Doh, I think that's like 24. Anyone have a
Pretty close.
24 bricks per minute, that is not 12% alcohol.
So it's about 1.1, so yeah. So that's roughly, I think it's about 12 and a half to almost 13 pounds of honey per gallon. Per 5.
Gallon of honey to 4 gallons of water.
No. Yeah. So 2.5 to 3 pounds per gallon of honey per gallon of water. Yeah. I hope I said that right. Yeah. All right. So really important to know, because for a long time everyone thought mead making. Well, mead making is like the easy way to ferment a beverage. If you want to do something easy, make mead. You just throw everything together. You don't have to boil anything. You don't got to do all the initial stuff when you're brewing beer. And then you just sit and wait, right? For a long time, that's how people made mead. You can do that. You can actually make decent mead that way if you wait long enough and get lucky. But if you actually flip it and you're trying to make really, really good mead and optimize the fermentation in a decent amount of time, like a month, it's actually quite different than brewing beer. Less work, a lot less work up front, a lot more work along the way to help it. So I like to kind of make a joke. So brewing beer is like a nice little jog on a warm day in San Diego. For yeast, going through that same fermentation process, it's doing that same jog on like a blistering day like today, and you're hungover, and you have a huge backpack on your back that you're carrying, and there's Raider fans throwing stuff at you. That's, for the yeast, what they're going through compared to if you pitch that same yeast in a regular beer wort. So that's important, because you have to know then how to help the yeast along. And that makes all the difference. You can help the yeast along in the right way, you can make fantastic mead, and from there, everything's easy. So now let's talk about yeast strains. Okay, there's still, I hear this all the time, still some confusion on strains, and I love White Labs. They haven't helped with this because they have a sweet mead yeast and a dry mead yeast, and they're older yeast. No mead makers really use those anymore, but they also don't really make sense because attenuation is for beer. It doesn't apply to mead at all because honey is all simple sugar, so that yeast will eat all of it. So there's no yeast. Oh, like an English ale yeast is gonna leave a little sweetness compared to like San Diego super yeast. No, that has nothing to do with it. Any yeast you catch that's ale or wine yeast is gonna eat through all the sugar if you give it the opportunity. So then, how do you have residual sugar in a mead? Also known as how to stabilize. There's a few ways, and this is an approach that every mead maker takes a little differently, and even commercially, like there's people in one camp and the other, and it doesn't really matter. You can make an amazing mead either way. One of the ways you can have residual sweetness is alcohol tolerance. So you basically let the yeast ferment as much as they can until they hit their alcohol tolerance, and then they stop, and then you have stable mead. Now, a couple notes on that. Whatever the alcohol tolerance says on the package is not what it is if you treat your yeast right.
Not even close.
Yeah, not even close. So like we use English Ale 02. I think the alcohol is like 8 to 10%, like 10% max. And we get it to 12, 13, no problem.
With the very wheat to 16.
Oh yeah? Yeah.
Just kept going.
Yeah, a wheat used to 16%. So if you treat it right, you can ignore those. So that's harder to do commercially, to know where it's going to hit its alcohol tolerance. Even the same strain changes from batch to batch. Some people though, the best mead maker in the world, Ken Tram, for those of you guys that were here at the last Mead Geek Society meeting, that's how he stabilizes his mead. He just throws so much sugar and fruit and honey into it. He lets the yeast do their thing, and where they stop, it stops, and he's been doing it long enough, he kind of knows where it'll be. It doesn't really matter if because this stuff is so big and full of flavor that it's off by a percent or something. It doesn't really matter. So some of the best mead makers in the world do that approach. A few of them, not many. Another way, stop fermentation. So you cold crash, right? You chill it down so the yeast are no longer fermenting, and then you add sulfite and sorbate. That is probably, well, another way to stop it is to let it ferment all the way through. Okay, it's eaten up all the sugar, it's gone down to dry, then you add sulfite and sorbate. Those two ways are probably the most common in mead making. We do it where we have the yeast go to where we want it. There's a little bit of residual sugar. We cold crash it, so the fermentation is stopped. We add sulfite sorbate, and so then when you warm it back up, the yeast are not going to re-ferment. Because we use an English ale yeast, that by the time it gets to 12%, it doesn't have a lot of life left in it, that we can do that. I've heard other meaderies that use like very strong wine yeast have trouble with that. Even stopping it, crashing it, adding sulfite sorbate, it's still having problems with re-fermentation. So it can depend on the yeast you use. If you're going to do that, I wouldn't use a really hardy yeast, like a champagne yeast. That you're fighting yourself on that. The number one way that people stabilize mead at home, and the easiest way to do it, is you let it ferment all the way to dry. It's done. You add your sulfite sorbate, and then you back sweeten. Okay. There's some of the best. It sounds like you may not get the best product at the end because you're just throwing raw honey back into it, but it's hard to tell the difference, and some really great meaderies do that process.
Instead of raw honey, can you use a sweet mead?
Even better.
Yeah.
Even better. So if you can blend a really sweet mead that's been stabilized, that has to be stabilized as well, because if it's not, you're defeating the purpose. But yeah, a stable sweet mead plus a dry one would be perfect. You have to think about how you stabilize the sweet mead, because if you stabilize that and hit its alcohol tolerance, and then you're blending it into something with a lower alcohol, the whole thing's gonna not work. But yes, the best way to do it is to blend.
I think when you talk about sulfite and sorbate, though, the only thing you want to point out that not everybody can tolerate it.
Yeah.
So you want to be sure that if you use it in your process, that you disclose it on your label so that people that have an intolerance don't have problems.
Yeah. We have to put that commercially, but at home, if you're going to be using sulfite sorbate, good idea just to have that so everyone knows. There's debate about whether there really is a sulfite allergy, but regardless, there are people that have a reaction. So, great point. So,
If you do the method where you sulfite sorbate before it's completely finished with your teeth, and then you want to use so after the cold crash like sulfite sorbate, are you worried about there being alphas or lactate, diacetyl, acetaldehyde, completely cut all that clean up?
yeah.
Turn that fan off a little bit.
So the question is, did everyone hear that?
Can you repeat maybe?
Okay. So in beer, you want the yeast to finish up their job because in basic terms, they clean up after themselves at the end, right? And you want them to do that to get rid of some of those off flavors on their own. And so the question is, if you don't let the yeast ferment all the way, and then you cold crash, and then you stabilize it, do you have any issues with those off flavors? I haven't seen a lot. I do ramp up the temperature at the end, so even though the yeast hasn't finished and hit their tolerance, they're still fermenting at the last few days at a higher temperature, much higher than where it started. But that's something that I've always been curious about. I don't think we've seen it on our stuff, but I can't promise you that it is not going to be there every time you do it. So I'm actually curious if anyone else has ever gone through that or knows anything about it, because we don't get a ton of diacetyl in our traditional mead or any base that we do. But if it was a beer and you cut it halfway, I think you'd have those issues. So.
I think you just stress them. If you avoid stressing them to the proper nutrition and temperature regimen, I think you have much less chance of that happening.
Yeah. If you avoid stressing them,
And get your pH right.
yeah, yeah. And there are it's very easy to stress a yeast, and so you're dealing with some there's big things you're trying to avoid. If you can avoid those, get a clean fermentation, that's what you want.
You either halt the fermentation before it's done, or you complete it and then you back sweeten. Either way, is there any kind of a raw, unfermented honey character that could be, like if you enter it in competition, you kind of don't want, you want honey character, but you don't want kind of the raw, unfermented honey. So how do you navigate that?
That is kind of a point of contention
Can you
among.
repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So you get raw honey character from a mead if you're letting it go and then back sweetening, or even if you're stopping it and stabilizing it with residual sugar. Is that raw honey character? It's a point of contention amongst mead makers, so I can't give you a perfect answer, because there's a lot of meaderies that like professional mead makers out there that are in one camp and some in the other. I think they kind of want to defend whatever process they use. Like, I can't taste raw honey because that's what they do. But personally think it's not as different as you might think, but I think if you ferment it dry and you back sweeten to like a high semi-sweet to sweet, if you're not aging it and letting it blend, it's for a long time you're going to get a distinctly raw honey flavor than if you had just either halted it. And like for our bucket all, what we do is we'll stop it at like 10-14, so 1.014, and then we back sweeten it to 1.018 just to kind of have the blend of the two. Because when you are fermenting with honey, as you're degassing and you're doing everything, you are blowing off aromatics the whole time. So my approach is I don't want a lot of raw honey, but I want a little bit to get some of those really delicate aromatics in if it's a really good honey. So I kind of blend the two. This will come down to taste. This is one of those things where some honeys may actually really taste raw and some probably no different at all. I think Orange Blossom is a great one to back sweeten with raw honey. You get that beautiful orange blossom aroma. Some probably not so much. Anyone have any experience with that? No?
Together? Want to try maybe turning the fan off or turn it down for a little bit?
It's getting a little loud?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear that.
Brian, can you turn that one right there off? Let's get this place clean.
Hey, Billy,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about nutrients and energizers?
Yeah, we're getting there
Okay.
in a couple slides. So that's stabilizing. What are considerations when choosing a yeast strain then? If attenuation is not an issue, ignore that. Flavor and aroma, although if you're looking at ale yeast, sometimes you'll get the same flavor profiles as it says. A lot of times you're not going to get, you need the precursors that are in the wort to get some of those flavor components that you won't get out of the honey. So roughly, you have your English, you'll get some of those esters. You have your Belgian, you'll get some of those phenols and esters and some flavor components, but it's not going to be, oh, this one said pear and da-da-da, and melon, and I'm going to get that from the yeast. It's really trial and error with me. Wine, a little bit closer. Still different, but you can get a little closer to, if it's a white wine yeast, it says you're going to get this, you can often pick those up in a mead. Alcohol tolerance consideration, and then temp range. So that's what I look at when looking at a yeast.
I know that alcohol tolerance indications that are typically, especially on ale yeast, are not applicable. But has White Labs? I know they were doing a bunch of research with meads. Do they have any type of mead alcohol tolerance guidelines that they have developed?
No, and if they did, I wouldn't trust them.
Okay.
But White Labs has a lot of work to do with mead that they're. I think it's exciting. They're starting to commit to that. One of the things we really need from them is nutrient needs from their yeast. Every wine yeast is going to say this needs high, low, or medium nutrients. That's really important for me. Talk to everyone at White Labs. Chris, Neva, they just haven't done that research yet. But hopefully as the meat industry grows, or everyone goes over after the class and bothers them, they'll start to do it. So,
you'd be wise to do a yeast starter with something like that, correct?
what's that?
Might be wise to do a yeast starter with something like that?
If you're using a liquid yeast, yes, definitely do a yeast starter. I'll get into what I do, but I basically like a beer starter. Just use honey, but keep it in that same gravity. No matter what gravity, even if you're going to be pitching it at a crazy high gravity, still make your starter the same you would a beer. I think like 1030, 1035, and I've not found anyone else anywhere that does. I take that back. One other person that uses liquid ale yeast and so does a yeast starter for their meads. so it's been hard to see what other people, use. I add certain nutrients in there that are actually used for rehydrating the yeast, so go firm, but I'll get into why I do that, but I do that for the starter. And I've talked to ScottLabs, and they're like, well, it's really for rehydrating, but I guess you could do it. But I think it helps, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. So yeast strains, who here has made meads with 71B? Yeah, it's the most popular one. There's a lot of reasons for it. It is just a great flavor and aroma profile for mead, and low nitrogen needs, which are really important, especially starting out. Again, honey doesn't have any of those nutrients, the biggest one being nitrogen, so the more that the yeast needs, the more you have to feed it and the more finicky it can be. There's a couple other ones, DV10, D47, really popular, D21, oh yeah, it's the next one. D21 is really popular. So those are medium nitrogen needs, high nitrogen needs. Now what that means, if you're going to use a wine yeast, there are plenty of calculators and information online as to how to do that, the exact steps, how much of what nutrient to give them. So I'm not going to go into that. A resource I'll keep coming back to is Mead Made Right. It's called TOSNA 2.0 is the process. It's online. It's got everything you need. If it's a medium nitrogen yeast strain, here's how much you have to add. I think it's great because it's tested, and Sergio, the owner of Meadery, who just took the most medals of any meadery in the country last year at the Mazer Cup, he's the one that's his process. So it's tried and true. A great resource for like, I want to make a berry melomel, or I want to make a sizer. What yeast strain would go perfect with that? There's a GotMead podcast on September 5th where Ryan Carlson just breaks it all down. If you're going to do a sizer with buckwheat honey, here's the yeast strain. Now, it doesn't mean those are the only ones to use, but if you want to get into it, it's a great resource. So just go online, you can listen to that. They're like an hour. For ale yeast, 001, tried and true. 002 is what we use. Although we are trying to find a way to go to dry yeast because of the crazy costs, because I have to pitch a new batch every time, so that can get really costly. Breweries keep reusing their yeast or get it from a bigger brewery. So right now we're using 002 because we know what that does, and I love it. I think it gives a nice little semester, some complexity that you don't get from 001. 007, another great one. 028, the Scottish Ale from White Labs. I like that one. I know other people have used that with great success. Same with 007. I've heard a lot of mead makers say that's really good. 085, I just had at the White Labs tasting room. It's their new English blend. And they had, they do like the yeast, the beers. This one has this, side by side. That one was amazing. So if anyone wants to try that, I'd be really interested in the results. So for dry yeast, 05 and 04. 05 is kind of like 001, right? The California Ale, really clean. 04 is like 02 or actually I think it's like 007. English ale yeast. Y yeast 1388. If anyone has heard of the bomb for his 1 month mead, it's online. It's big in the GotMead community. It's basically how to make a delicious mead in 1 month, even if you don't have temperature control. And so that's a Belgian yeast that I think just ferments really well at any temperature. So it's kind to mead, and I know a lot of people have done well with that. Y yeast 3711 is their French saison, which is I've really liked with mead. Who else has tried some yeasts out there that they would recommend that aren't up there?
QA23.
QA23, yeah. A beautiful, like tropical, right?
Some, yeah, it really preserves a lot of the flavor, aroma, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Sort of it's similar to B47 without the temperature issues that you can get at.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, that's another one I've heard people use. Yeah.
Which one was that, Billy?
QA23.
It's not good.
Anything else? No?
I think the 002 is really nice with like raspberry, blackberry, that kind of thing. It just has gives it almost a little bit of a yogurty tang, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Because I really like the way it is.
Yeah. I think Vince up at Horn has used
The 002, I think.
He's 002. He's used like a 008. Is that the East Coast? And that gives it kind of a tang too, and I think he's like that. Yeah.
There's a German wine yeast company called Bjorka. And
Yeah.
we've used that with good success.
Really?
Some other white wine yeasts.
Okay. Bjorka?
Bjorka, yeah. Susie and I made one. We got Southwest Division 2 years in a row.
Oh, nice.
So first place. So it's a good yeast.
All right. We have to. Someone take a note.
So Billy, so 1388 is a Duvel strain, right? There is an equivalent.
What's that?
1388 is the same as 570 White Labs. Do you have any comments on why is it performing similarly? Has anybody tried it? It should be the same strain technically, right? It's Duvel.
Well, this is a guy. It was a guy in Texas doing experiments, and so I don't know if they just had white yeast and not White Labs there. But this is, and I don't know if he tested it against the White Labs strain, but that's what he swears is his favorite yeast.
I don't think it was on his original list.
Yeah.
He just did it was a ale yeast test that he did. It shows these things that were easily available to him, and then cut it down from there and tried them against each other, the ones he liked. So it wasn't comprehensive by any stretch of the imagination, but he found that he really liked that one.
Yeah, so after NHC, there was the advanced mead making seminar, came out and I wanted to propose a fermentation experiment with some of the QUAFF members. I think I talked to Doug about it, and basically want to do a must, maybe 6 to 8 gallons, and get a few people involved and pitch different yeasts, and let them all go terminal and do an evaluation. So I'll probably post something out to the list afterwards.
Yeah.
So it'd be fun to try some of these and actually do a tasting side by side.
Yeah.
And then maybe afterwards do some blending or
I
something.
think there was a while back, I want to say a year and a half ago, Zymurgy had a Mead article that had all the different tastings, and it had a bunch of different yeasts and who liked what.
Okay.
So they kind of did
That was your article, right?
something like that.
Was that your?
It's
I mean, it's more fun to actually taste it though than to read about it.
Yeah, so I had one on ale yeast, and then someone did one on wine yeast.
Yeah, we did a cider one. What was it 5 years ago or 4 years ago? Something similar to that.
Okay. I wanted to mention that if you guys want mead, come up and the bar is open. Susanna is pouring. If you do it quietly, if you want any, but we are gonna open up for you guys before we open it.
Yeah.
All right.
There goes the audience.
Pitch rate. In terms of parts per million or number of cells, you hear all different things, and so I tried to distill it just to what the normal recommendations are from mead makers who were just saying, like, here's how many vials or packets of dry yeast you usually do. Because I've seen anywhere from 1 to 5. A lot of commercial mead makers will say, oh, you only need 1 to 2 grams per gallon, depending on the gravity. Now they're using wine yeast, and if you go to the Brewer's Friend or any of the calculators that tell you the pitch rate, when you say dry yeast, they'll say you need like 6 grams per gallon or something like that, because there's a lot of difference in what the manufacturers are saying is in a gram of their dry yeast. I think wine yeast, like Lallemand is saying, they have more up to 20 something versus like Sapphale that has like 6 to 8. So generally 2 to 3 grams per gallon if you want to be safe. 3 grams per gallon for your normal gravity that you would start with for Mead is pretty safe. So for ale yeast, I would just use a pitch calculator. What I used to do at home is use 2 packs of the pure pitch White Labs with a starter for like a 5-gallon batch. So like a 2-liter starter and 2 packs of the pure pitch, and that was plenty. I stretch it a little more commercially because it's really expensive. Okay, yeast rehydration. I'm not really going to go into this too much because there's just such good information out there online. It's just download the ScottLabs handbook. If you don't have that and you're going to use any kind of wine yeast or dry yeast, just make that your Bible. It'll tell you everything you need to do. And TOSNA 2.0, that website I mentioned, they'll have the resource for how to rehydrate. The important thing is you do have to rehydrate your dry yeast for Mead, even if some of the manufacturers for dry ale yeast are saying, nah, you just pitch it right on, it doesn't matter anymore, we changed our minds. With Mead and the type of difficult fermentation that you're going to put the yeast through, I would always rehydrate. When you're rehydrating, you're adding GoFirm, and that's filling the yeast with nutrients, micronutrients, and the things they need to survive later on in the difficult ferment. Okay, so let's talk about nutrients. Yeast assimilable nitrogen, YAN, is what we're really talking about. And the YAN levels are different per yeast strain. Now, you have to give the yeast, make sure it has the YAN that it needs, because if you fall short, that is the #1 way you're going to start getting off flavors. And the very first off flavor you'll probably get is sulfur, kind of the burnt match, rotten eggs smell, which is really easy to get in Mead. It's also really easy to recover from, but if you don't recover from it, it's just the yeast are just saying, hey, we're hungry, we're stressed, and we are going to make you pay if you don't feed us.
You're going to talk about off-flavor recovery later on, or you want to?
I mean, yeah,
Okay.
I do have a slide on what to do. So generally, 180 to 350 parts per million YAN is what you want to shoot for. Again, it depends on the yeast strain. ScottLabs, the handbook, has the data for all the wine strains. White Labs, like I said, they don't. I usually put ale yeast around 250 to 300 parts per million is what I would shoot for if you're using an ale yeast. I found some like the wheat beer yeast need a lot more. I don't know why, or maybe it's just when I did it, something happened. But there's still variance in the ale yeast, but I would just shoot for like 250. Now the type of nitrogen source, this is a lot of fun because everyone has their own approach, and everyone swears that it makes a huge difference, and it actually might. One thing to know is that some of the best mead makers in the world use the nutrients that now they tell you not to use. So I try and find mead makers that make great traditionals and then seek out what their process is. Like Ken Schramm was telling us when the last meeting, he uses DAP and Fermaid O. A lot of people are saying don't use DAP anymore. He thinks you need it. Now, Ken's meads end very, very sweet. So if he were to just present a traditional, off-dry mead, would you be able to tell the difference if you use DAP or not DAP? I don't know, but he's in one camp. There's other people that say use all Fermaid O. So here's the difference. DAP is inorganic nitrogen. It's basically like crack for the yeast. So they want it, give it all to them. They eat it all up and go crazy. They grow, right? The population, huge population growth spike, a lot of activity that raises the temperature inside the fermentation. It also, when you have rapid growth, then you have fusel and ester production, right? Can be good, can be really bad. You don't want fusel alcohols. So if you have really rapid growth in the first 48 hours, like you pitch all the DAP up front, you're going to have a lot of fusels in that mead at the end, and that'll be why. Fermaid K is a blend of the two. For a while, Fermaid K was like, hey, we're a lot of organic nitrogen and a little bit of DAP, and some people just used all Fermaid K throughout. That works just fine. Some people think that the yeast are using organic versus inorganic nitrogen at different times, and they can't just switch on and off quickly. So once they use all the inorganic nitrogen, they have to, and being really unscientific, but they basically have to rest and figure out how to process now the organic nitrogen. And so when you're using something like Fermaid K, it doesn't quite work as perfectly as you think it would in your head. I'm giving them something, the inorganic and then a lot of the organic. So that's why some people have switched to all Fermaid O, which is just organic nitrogen. That is more like, compared to the crack, that's more like the salad. They don't crave it as much, but if you give it to them, they're going to eat it, and they're going to be healthier for it. They're going to eat it and kind of not go crazy, but get the energy they need, and then continue to kind of use it efficiently. So we use all Fermaid O. We're in that camp. Again, some mead makers that are some of the best in the world use the other stuff. So there's really no wrong or right way to do it. Just know what you're doing when you use it. So if you're going to use DAP or Fermaid K, know that you're going to have those spikes of activity. So know that you want to keep the temperature down during that time and make sure you're really managing it. One thing you don't want to do is use DAP before fermentation has started. So you don't want to throw DAP in when you pitch the yeast. It'll be toxic to it. Timing, that's another thing. Everyone kind of has their own approach. The most basic is just, if you're using dry yeast, it's really easy because everyone does the same thing. So like the Tosma 2.0, if you want to use Fermaid O, you want to use dry yeast, you rehydrate the yeast, pitch it, don't add any nutrients. That was part of the rehydration. Next day, add 1/4 of your nutrients. Day 2, another 1/4, so you're up to half. Day 3, another 1/4, and then when it hits its 1/3 sugar break, which means you're checking gravity and it's gone 1/3 of the way through fermentation, you do your last pitch of nutrients. And it's important that you do it not after that, because at some point yeast can't take up the nutrients, and so all you're going to get is nutrient flavor in your final mead. But you don't want to do it, let's say you have a really big mead and you're fermenting it and it's nice and steady. Instead of doing day 1, 2, 3, 4, you want to hold off on that last one, so you give it to them at a good time to make it all the way through the rest of fermentation, if say they have another 3 weeks to go. So that's the most common way to do it. Some people do half and half. Even ScottLabs will tell you to do half and half, although they're more familiar with wine and cider. Some people will just do
50, 25, 25. And I
Yeah,
typically don't do the 50 until I get a pretty vigorous fermentation after the pitch. So it could sometimes be 36 hours. Or
giving them a chance to get going and then do it.
Do you mind restating that schedule?
So if you're using dry yeast and you've rehydrated the yeast, so you've given them the initial nutrients in that rehydration process, Then you pitch, and then you wait 24 hours, and then do your first nutrient addition. And then the next day, your second nutrient addition. Third, third is the next day, and then the last one is at the 1/3 sugar break.
Right.
Might overheated.
How much total Fermaid O do you use? How do you calculate that?
So there's calculators online that based on the GAN ppm you want to hit will tell you what to do. So we were shooting for 280 parts per million, and for us that meant 44 grams of Fermaid O for a 5-gallon batch. There's some calculators that will tell you that will give you even higher yen, because the thing with Fermaid O is it's more efficient than like DAP. So DAP is, here's the amount of nitrogen in DAP, and that's exactly how much they're going to get. Fermaid O is, here's the amount of nitrogen in Fermaid O, but since they're using it more efficiently, you know, it has like a factor of 3 or a factor of 5. So it's a little cloudy. The Tosin 2.0 will tell you how much to add, and they have a pretty easy calculator. And then I came up with kind of my own, and it was just whatever that comes out to be, like 9 grams per gallon.
And ScottLabs lists it as well.
ScottLabs listed as well, yeah. So that's the nutrients.
It's just really hot. The fan keeps turning.
But that was for your yeast. It's kind of more in the medium requirement.
Medium to medium high. Yeah. People will tell you for wine you can shoot for a little less. Now again, this is all for traditional meads. If you are adding fruit to your mead, that is going to supply nitrogen. Just like, you know, if you're making wine, a lot of winemakers don't add nutrients because they have everything from the grapes. So a lot of people will add fruit in primary to get that source of nitrogen. It can help out. So you actually, there's the Tosin 2.0 says if you're using fruit, you know, subtract, you only use like 75% or something. Some people say you can use 50%, but keep that in mind.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, I like probably the primary type of mead that I make are melts, and I do almost all my fruit in primary. Probably about most fruit around 20 pounds per 5-gallon batch, so I put a lot of fruit in there, and I still use a fairly standard SNA protocol, and I haven't had any problems with, you know, undigested nutrients. I haven't experimented with ramping it down, you know, to see what, you know, maybe I don't need as much as I'm using, but I haven't had any problems with the yeast not being able to digest what we put in there.
Yeah, that's exactly where you want to be. Give them everything they need, and then as long as you can't taste anything at the end, perfect.
You said you're using 9 grams of Fermaid O per gallon. That's throughout the entire step process.
That would have been the total, yeah, because it was like 44 or 45 grams per 5 gallons for the total, so it would be 11 grams each time. Did I say that right?
Oh, yeah.
It's been a while since I've done that. Now we just throw them.
Is the yan requirement for wine yeast higher?
It depends on the strain, but in general, I think ale yeasts are on the medium to medium high side. Like U71B, an ale yeast will be more than that than what 71B. All right, there's some other stuff I want to get through, so I'm going to go through this a little quicker. Just to know about pH drop, that can be a common cause for a stuck fermentation, right? Hey, my meat stopped fermenting, what happened? First thing to do is check the pH, because honey is not a good pH buffer. like grain is. So anything under 3.2, if that's where your pH is at, you can start to have problems.
Degassing plays a role in that too, right?
Yes. There we go. So, degassing is one of those things you're going to do along with adding nutrients that is the babysitting part of mead making that you don't have to do in beer brewing for the most part in a lot of beers. So what you're doing is it's such a high gravity and honey is so viscous, the CO2 is getting trapped in there, and that can cause a number of issues. But the number one thing is that it's carbonic acid, which will drop the pH, which can cause the yeast to stop. So you want to whip it around, get the CO2 out. I did that at home about 2 times a day until the 1/3 sugar break. So that's like a week of twice a day. You're going in, and if you have a 5-gallon carboy, you're putting one of those mixer wands on a drill. Starting very slow at first.
Speaking from experience.
Everybody was laughing.
Mead shower.
My dad is helping us with production now, and he's never made a mead at home, but he's helping with the stuff here. And the first time I kind of had him do his own thing, I had him degas, and we just run a cycle through the pumps. And he created a volcano with that 20-barrel. And he felt so bad. I was like, everyone has to happen. It just sucks to happen.
It's a lot better when it's a 1 gallon, right?
Yeah. So you'll find out when you do it. You'll kind of get used to how much you have to do. It is easier if you use like a wide mouth, like a bucket.
Yeah.
I never used a bucket, and I never really thought of that until after I started doing
And
this.
it's worse with melts. If you have a lot of food and prime, oh my god.
Yeah.
It's just, they will. I use an 8-gallon for a 5-gallon batch just because of that.
Yeah, yeah. You really got to leave headspace. You really got to leave headspace. So you do want oxygen during that time. Just like winemaking, oxygen is good sometimes and really bad other times. You need to know when that is. So oxygen is good all the way up into the 1/3 sugar break. After that, bad. Okay. So when the thing with mead compared to beer is with mead, a lot of times you're continuing to play with it months afterwards, and you're blending and you're adding tannins and acid. So you keep exposing the mead, and that's okay as long as you know how to purge the oxygen out with CO2 every time. So that's when you need to have it in a carboy. You need to have a way to, say you're going to pop it off, taste it, blend a little tannin in, add some oak, whatever. You need to have a way to push CO2 into the headspace and then stop it back up so you purge the oxygen out. That's really, really important.
If somebody, sorry, but if somebody doesn't have, like a cylinder or anything like that, a real easy way is CO2 cartridge bicycle pump. Just with a little cartridge, and you just give it a quick boost. And
Yeah. So now we'll get into fine tuning. This is where you can take a mediocre mead and make it an amazing mead. And this is really important because, especially for traditionals, but for a lot of different types of mead, this is where no matter how well you did during fermentation, to really get it to the next level, you need to know how to fine tune it. So the balance that we're really looking for is between sweetness, acidity, tannin, alcohol, carbonation, and body. All of those things affect the other things. Sometimes it can be pretty straightforward. Acidity and sweetness can be used to kind of balance each other. Sometimes it's really more of a blend of all of them. So a little bit of tannin is going to balance some of the sweetness. Depending on what it is, it's going to also give it some body. Carbonation may give it some body. Alcohol may actually increase perceived sweetness, but also change the body. So if you ever want to get it, well, you should really get into it. The BJCP Mead Study Guide has a whole section on balance. It's the best I've ever seen out there. It's amazing. Just download that and read it. It'll tell you everything. It's got a paragraph on every single one of those points. Another point on this is at the Mazer Cup this year, there was a presentation that the owner of Meridian Hive Meadery out in Austin, Texas did, and they make great meads. And he had a traditional mead that he hadn't done anything with, but they really know how to ferment clean mead. So this was a good mead. Then he added some, what was it? He added I forget what the middle one was, and the last one was adding acid and tannin together. And the difference between the initial mead, which was fermented grape but no acid or tannin added, to the last one, which had a little bit of acid and some tannin to balance it, was like night and day. And you didn't know it until you got to the end. You're like, oh, that's what this mead could be. So one, you had a beautiful mead, but the last one was so much more body and depth and balance, sweetness, and everything. And it's just a little bit of acid and tannin. So that is really important. Tannins are one of my favorite way to balance a mead, because acid can be great for like certain recipes, like really fruity, like a melomel or mead with fruit, or something where it's already going to have a little acid with it, so you up the acid and it makes sense. Some meads, it's going to be weird if you really try and balance it only with acid, like chocolate, coffee mead, like a chocolate vanilla mead, right? You add a bunch of, say it's really sweet, you add a bunch of acid, then you have like this weird, sweet, tart chocolate vanilla mead. It doesn't quite make as much sense. Tannins are where you can really help balance it out, and tannins really fit with almost every kind of mead. So you get tannins from oak or fruit. So like, obviously, grapes, the most obvious one, tons of tannins, and then they're aging it in oak to give it even more tannins. Berry skins, yeah. Some fruit has a lot more than other. You can add it during fermentation. FT Blanc soft, for those of you that had Carbon's meads at NHC, he adds that into every single ferment he does. I haven't worked with it, but I know that it works well. Finishing tannins, I use Royal and Radiance. They're from ScottLabs. They're a little pricey, and they only sell them in like bigger things, but they are amazing. And that's an oak tannin, and if you just smell it, and you just get this vanilla oak, like butterscotch, just beautiful smell for the Royal one. The Radiance one is more for like white wines. They can really add tannin and some nice flavor profiles.
So are these, I've never used those, are these powders? Are these powders?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And how much would you typically use, say, in a 5-gallon batch?
If it's a powdered tannin, 0.2 to 0.5 grams per gallon. It really depends on like what kind of mead. So if it's a dry mead, be careful. If it's a really sweet mead, you can get away with a lot more. For this stuff though, I use like 0.3 to 0.4 grams per gallon. And that I also age it on oak, so I could up it if I weren't doing the oak additions.
So one of those containers we could split with some people pretty easily.
Use that for a long time.
For life.
So I've played around with this with ciders and meads, but there's BSG actually has all these different powders for different toast oaks and things like that available. So you can order them through BSG, which you can get through homebrew shops, and I'm sure you can get a lot of those powders. But I will also use chips and cubes. I'll either make teas or tinctures out of it. Hot water in a jar and let them sit and kind of stew that way, or maybe use a really clean spirit like a vodka or something like that. You can extract a lot, even just cupping, just putting little.
Yeah.
You can do it that way, or even sanitize it that way, and have the oak and the tincture as well, like a tea or tincture.
Yeah.
So you could make all kinds of weird.
I was going to ask about chips versus spirals versus cubes versus that kind of thing. Any guidance on that?
It's really on exposure time. So chips all you need is 2 to 4 weeks. Cubes, 1 to 3 months. Spirals a little longer, and the way it kind of works is the smaller the surface area, the less time it needs, but also the less depth it will give you, all the way up into like a barrel, right? So if you use chips, don't need much time. It's not going to give you, it'll give you some, could give you tannins, great flavor, but not the depth that you would get from all the way to like a barrel aging. And so you just have to look at, okay, what's the surface area? That should indicate how long you need to age it for and what it's going to do. But really just go by taste. So if it says you need 3 months, check it every 2 weeks, you know, because it depends on the toast level, depends on the type of oak, all of that. All right.
If you were using chips, say like in a 5-gallon batch, like, I know it's going to depend on how my grand taste is, but what's like the average amount of chips you use?
I don't know chips. I used to use like 5 to 7 cubes per gallon at home. Like I think 5 cubes per gallon, little. So you get the little cubes. They're like look like dice, you know. And online there's all sorts of there's resources for how much to use for the different types of oak, but I was always using cubes, and it was like 5 to 7. If it was like a traditional, more like 4 to 5. If it was a really big flavored mead, more like 7. And American oak is going to give you a lot more extraction than say French and Hungarian, and so just be careful with American oak. That's why a lot of winemakers are like, oh, American oak, just overpower the wine. Well, it's perfect. It's really nice with mead because mead has usually more residual sugar, and it has kind of the flavor profiles that go along with American. But French is, you know, the cream of the crop for oak, and if you're doing a mellow male, it can be fantastic. Acid, real quick. So there's 3 types of acid you would use if you're not using like a fruit or something to balance it out. You get these in powdered form. Tartaric, that's what grape acid comes from. This tartaric acid comes from grapes. Malic acid comes from apples. Citric acid, citrus. So tartaric is the most often used because it is it's kind of the most depth of all the acids and the least like really tart. And everyone this is one where you really want to, like what Brian was saying, do bench trials because every mead usually needs a different acid. Malic really has that green apple taste. Great for sizers. We used it for our watermelon mint mead for whatever reason. It worked really good with that, but it doesn't work good for other ones. Citric is great. Be careful. It can come off as a little like sweet tart candy-ish.
It's actually what they use if you have sour candies.
Yeah.
The powder on top
That's what
is sugar and citric acid, like Sour Patch Kids.
Yeah.
That's what you're eating.
So you use too much of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit.
Flips on that.
Fruit's a great way to add acid. Mead makers like Ken, who we've been talking about, will make a crazy huge sweet mead, but then use so much acidic fruit, it balances it out in like this beautiful way. So really high acidic fruits, black currants are going to be as acidic as you can get. Well, besides citrus, tart cherries, raspberries. Sean, Serpentine Cider has a sour kumquat cider that is fantastic, and you get a really bright acidity from that. Sour plums.
Do you have a source for fresh blackcurrant?
Not out here.
Yeah, that's the problem. You can't. I mean, I haven't found any currants out here.
No, you won't. But
Ken Schramm buys it all.
yeah.
No, I mean, you can find them in the Midwest. Out in the Midwest, it's on there. Just
You get them frozen though.
Yeah, black currants are actually one fruit that you can get away with using different types like juice or juice concentrate, and it does really well with black currants.
oh, okay, cool.
we got juice off of Amazon for one of our experimental meats, the baby steps. It was fantastic. You don't get, when you use juice, you don't get the tannins, but you get all the acidity and the flavor.
If you use it in primary, then it'll blend in.
Yeah, be careful using black currants in primary. You don't want to pH to drop too much. Finding agents, I would just say at the home level, buy a pack of super clear and just do what it says. You're fine.
It's amazing.
I love super clear KC.
It's amazing.
Bill?
Yeah.
If you don't care about winning any competitions, what's your opinion on clearing it up?
On clearing it up?
I mean, I kind of like the idea. It's kind of lucky looking, so it's like, oh, it's got more nutrients in it, so I'm drinking something healthier.
Yeah.
Whatever works.
It's a nice thought. It depends. And what I've found is that if you're gonna go for cloudy, like make sure it stays cloudy. With mead, what you don't want is to be in that middle ground where it's like, just looks like it's like trying to be clear, but it's not, so it just looks like lazy. But if it's totally cloudy, like Sean has some ciders that are just completely cloudy, and they look perfect. They look perfect because there's not that middle ground. With mead, sometimes it starts to drop out. So you either want to go like cloudy or clear, in my opinion. But I'm also, I mean, you guys do whatever you want. I have to sell it. So. Time. A lot of people don't like to add finding agents. That's fine. Just if you're going to continually rack it, be careful. You could do more damage to your meat doing like 5 or 6 rackings than adding finding agents.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Every time you rack, you're exposing it to.
Oxygenation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oxidization.
Yeah. That's it. That's it. Every time you touch your meat, there's a chance of contamination or oxidation. And finding agents are not going to impact your meat, even though it looks like it should, because it just drops everything out in 2 days. All right. Fruit. I want to get on this because everyone has a different approach. Primary versus secondary. There's the one thing to just remember, there's not a right way, it's what do you want your mead to be like, because they make 2 different meads. So you put fruit in primary, you're going to get fermented fruit flavor, right? Different than fresh fruit flavor. So think of wine versus grape juice. Pretty simple. Now, there's some benefits to doing primary. You get the nutrients from it. Sometimes it's a little easier. Benefits to secondary, you get more of that fresh fruit. And if you're using a fruit where you really want the fresh aroma, like strawberries, I think strawberry is a great fruit to, even if you do some in primary, do a lot in secondary, because it's just that beautiful strawberry aroma that you can lose if you ferment it out.
Or use a lot more.
Or you have to use a lot more. That's also primary sometimes use a lot more, than secondary. But always try it, and you might be surprised. Like Brian made a pineapple mead, all pineapple in primary, which I would have thought would have been different than what it was. It came out just amazing. So that's a fruit I would have thought secondary. So some fruits though really lend themselves to primary. Dark fruits where you ferment it out, fermented berries, grapes, obviously apple juice, always in primary. So it just depends on what you want. But do know that if you do it in primary, you're going to lose some of that aroma. So it'd be good to add some more in secondary. Carbon did a presentation at the Major Cup this year where he did 4 different, same mead. One had all primary additions, one had half and half, one had like 25% along the way at 4 different times, and then one had all fruit and secondary. And then everyone there was like 100 people, we all tasted it, voted blind. The winner was half and half and then all in secondary. And all in primary actually got last. Now, there were subtle differences and everyone had their favorite, but it was just to show that, because traditionally a lot of meat makers do all in primary, that you don't have to do that. There are other ways to do it. And again, it really comes down to the ingredients, to the fruit.
What was the fruit on that front?
It was like I think an elderberry
Yeah.
something.
But did he use the same amount of fruit, just divided it up?
Same amount.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah. He had to keep it,
Yeah, if you go primary, you got to go like 4 or 5 times more fruit.
Billy, when you're saying doing secondary, is this after attenuation, after fermentation is complete, is this after sulfiting, is this?
Yeah, so it depends on what you want. So if you add it after it's stabilized, you're going to get that fresh fruit, and it's not going to be fermented at all. Which, yeah, when I'm saying secondary, that's what I'm talking about. You can add it at the end of fermentation, and oftentimes mead makers will do that to actually make sure the yeast gets to their alcohol tolerance. So the yeast is fermented all the way. You add a bunch of fruit in, it increases the sugar level, so it ferments maybe a half of that fruit and then just kind of dies off. That's kind of a natural way to do it. Does that make sense? So it really depends on what you want. If you want some of the fermented flavor, but you also want some of that brightness, to stick around afterwards, do it like towards the end and let it hit alcohol tolerance. A lot of people though will do it after it's stabilized, and so you're adding, you're kind of back sweetening, but with fruit. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what fruit, because some fruit sugars are not fermentable, and I think that's why pineapple and certain fruits would do that.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with peptic haze? Do you peptid haze? Do you do peptic enzyme or any? Do you do anything to get it clear?
Yeah,
when you're doing fruit additions, because you're going to add a lot of.
Yeah.
A lot of times you're adding haze to it.
If you're adding fruit in the beginning, most mead makers will add pectic enzyme to break that down. If you're adding it at the end, interestingly enough, a lot of times adding fruit after it's stabilized will actually help drop it out, and it'll clear up an otherwise somewhat cloudy traditional. Pectic enzyme you can add in secondary, but it doesn't work as efficiently. So I would add it if you're adding fruit primary. I haven't added it in secondary, and I know that you can.
Yeah.
But I don't know much about it.
Does like super clear drop it as well, or filter? I mean, I guess you could filter it or do PSL, China-San kind of thing.
Yeah, it depends. It will always depend on the fruit, the charge of the particles. But you'd be surprised. A lot of times adding stuff in secondary will just help drop everything out. And I don't know if it's because some of the fruit has a charge and the honey proteins have another charge, and but I've never had a mellow-mel. Mellow-mels for me have always been easier to clear, if not cleared on their own, compared to traditionals. Traditional mead is the hardest thing to clear. Even using super clear, you'll find it doesn't quite get brilliant for a little while, at least in my experience. Unless you ferment dry, then it doesn't.
Do you have experience with Sparkaloid?
Yeah, so I use hot mix Sparkaloid here. I love it. It is supposedly the gentlest, the most gentle fining agent. So if you're really worried about it, hot mix Sparkaloid it's a clay that was basically created to do as little to like no damage at all, like not strip out anything other than visually what you see. And it's really hard to overfine with Sparkaloid, I guess is what I'm saying. Use something like bentonite or some other stuff, and you really have to use the right amount. You can overfine, and then it'll start pulling flavor compounds out. Sparkaloid is hard to overfine, but it does. For mine, it takes some time. It takes about a month, 3 to 4 weeks to clear up. Whereas maybe it's just smaller batches, but at home with super clear, it was like 48 hours.
Yeah. So like 2 days, 3 days, super clear.
You had a carbonation thing on the last slide, and you kind of didn't talk much about natural versus forced. I was curious what you had to say about that.
If you you know what you're doing with natural carbonation, go for it. A lot of brewers do that. With mead, you can only do natural if you have a dry mead, right?
Yeah. And if you didn't stabilize it in any way, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, well, if you have residual sugar and you're going for naturally carbonated, you're gambling with getting that right, because that's how you get bottle bombs. So, I don't recommend doing natural unless you're dry, and then or Golden Coast, what they do is they let it ferment almost dry, or at least they used to, and then they would bottle it, and the rest of the honey would.
I think they actually pressurize the fermenter now.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I think they changed it up. All right. Well, it's 12. I was hoping I'd get through all this, but I'm not going to, because we have to open.
Let's have another meeting.
Yeah. So on that note, Mead Geek Society. I know a lot of you are in it. It is a club to celebrate mead. We share mead. We drink mead. We learn about mead. We hear from the best mead makers in the world. Next meeting is on the 11th, Monday. If you want to sign up, we have an email list somewhere here, and you can go Facebook, Mead Geek Society. It's on there. It's fantastic. It's a big mead share. QUAFF next meeting is
28th.
Monday is the 13th.
I meant the 13th for the Mead Geek Society, not the 11th. The 13th.
And who's the speaker this month?
It's Michael Fairbrother of Online Meter.
Is he going to be here?
So on that note, we'll end this. I'm happy to answer more questions at any time. Everyone should have my email. Go to QUAFF. We can talk then. Go to Mead Geek Society. And Mead and Cider are now, come up and get some if you'd like some. And thank you guys for coming.
6 o'clock for Mead Geek Society.
6 o'clock. For this one, yeah.
Alex Fairda.
You have a meadery, or you?
No, just a honey. I kind of learned from Frank and Chris at Golden Coast, and been making mead for about 2 years.
I've already